I'm Evelyn, 33 years old, and some mornings I wake up in my quiet apartment in Portland, sunlight streaming through the blinds, and wonder, was there a moment in my past where I did something so wrong that my own sister decided to make me a pawn in her twisted game? I can't pinpoint exactly when I first started feeling unsafe around Isabel, my older sister, but the memory of that unease has never faded. The way she looked at me whenever adults praised me, as if I'd stolen the spotlight that rightfully belonged to her. Back in elementary school, Isabel was always the golden girl. Beautiful, smart, charismatic. But behind every compliment was something sharp and cold I didn't yet know how to name. I still remember vividly one spring day when I was 11, bringing home an invitation to a city-wide art contest, grinning from ear to ear. Before my mom could cheer, Isabel snatched the paper from my hand, skimmed it, and said in a voice light as air but cutting like glass, "Guess they were short on applicants if they accepted yours." I froze. Mom offered a weak smile. Dad said nothing. And just like that, the moment disappeared as if it had never happened. In 8th grade, I was elected class president. Isabel was in high school then, and within a week, someone accused me of rigging the vote. No one investigated. The title was revoked. Friends distanced themselves. I spent the semester alone. Years later, I learned that the anonymous letter had been printed from Isabel's laptop. But the worst came when I was 17. I started seeing Andrew, a classmate from biology. He wasn't flashy, but he was kind and had a way of making me feel like I mattered. We studied together, took the same bus home, shared quiet hopes we didn't tell anyone else. I had never told anyone I wanted to be a veterinarian, except Andrew. 2 months later, Isabel began tutoring Andrew in chemistry. I didn't suspect anything. She was my sister after all, the one I kept hoping would finally want to be close. Then one day I went to meet Andrew at the library and found them sitting together in the corner, laughing, her hand possessively resting over his. When I confronted her, she smiled without blinking. "You really thought someone like him would stay loyal to someone like you?" I could barely breathe. "You did this on purpose?" "It's not my fault you can't keep your guy." I dropped my notebook and walked out. Later, Mom told me not to make a scene. Dad said, "You girls will be fine. Sisters fight. It's normal." I wanted to believe that. I tried to. After every betrayal, Isabel would return with teary eyes and lullaby apologies. "I messed up. I'll change. I miss you." And me, foolish enough to crave the kind of sisterhood I read about in childhood books, I opened the door again. I've lost count of how many times I forgave her. Or how many times I told myself, this time will be different. But it never was. She would embrace me tightly, and the moment I let down my guard, she'd pull the pin on another grenade. People around us called it sibling rivalry, said it was healthy competition. They didn't see the cold glances when backs were turned, the smug smiles behind compliments. They didn't grow up under the shadow I did, one that lied fluently, cried on cue, and made others think I was the unreasonable one while she played the victim. I always thought that if I was patient enough, kind enough, mature enough, Isabel would change. Maybe that wasn't hope. Maybe it was desperation disguised as hope. Everything changed on the night of her 12th wedding anniversary. As that night, I saw her slip something into my glass of wine. And I gave that glass to her husband. About a year after Isabel married Scott Hendricks, heir to a luxury hotel chain in Arizona, our relationship entered a strange limbo. Not close enough to feel safe, not distant enough to fully escape. Isabel seemed calmer. At least on the surface. She began sending me pictures from cruises in the Gulf of Mexico, tagging me in sentimental sisterhood posts on Facebook, occasionally inviting me out shopping with no apparent reason other than, "I miss my little sister." One time while I was at a bookstore, she texted me, "Want a tiny Chanel bag to carry that heartbreak?" Attached was a photo of a bag, nearly $2,000, resting neatly in the trunk of her car. I was still unraveling from my breakup with Jake, the man I thought I'd build a life with. We split after a trip to Lake Tahoe. No cheating, no scandal, just Jake perpetually unsure if I was the one. I walked away with a shattered heart and a question that chilled me. Does anyone actually love me for real? At that moment, Isabel's invitation landed like a perfect distraction. 12-year anniversary. Arcadia Grand Hotel. Dress code, black and gold. Leave the drama at home. I scoffed at that last line. Classic Isabel. Even her party invites had a passive-aggressive flourish. But I went. Scott had always been the anomaly in Isabel's orbit. Gentle, a bit introverted, the opposite of her overwhelming energy. In the early years, I truly believed he might anchor her. Or at least be too decent to be swallowed whole like the men before him. I still remember the way he looked at her on their wedding day, when Isabel walked down the aisle in that crystal-studded Ellie Saab gown, like he was seeing a dream he didn't dare touch. Back then, I genuinely wanted to wish them well. Because if Isabel was truly happy, maybe I could finally breathe easier. For nearly a decade after, she and I maintained a kind of silent truce. No one dug up the past. I never mentioned Andrew, the Stanford scholarship, or any of the pain Isabel had caused. She didn't throw jabs or make snide remarks anymore either. At times, I almost believed she might actually be changing. I was wrong. The anniversary party was held on a warm Saturday evening in mid-September, inside the Sapphire Hall of the Arcadia Grand Hotel in Phoenix. The ballroom glowed in soft golden lights, marble floors reflecting the shimmer of crystal strands swaying from a ceiling nearly 30 feet high. Everything was flawless, almost unnaturally so. I arrived 5 minutes late. Isabel swooped in immediately, hugged me like we were lifelong best friends, and whispered through gritted teeth while her cheek was still pressed against mine, "What brand is that dress?" "Not bad looking." I replied softly, "No brand. Bought it myself." She chuckled, though her eyes didn't. "Oh, so no budget for a stylist then?" I was about to turn away when Scott appeared, cutting through the bitter air with his genuine smile. "Evelyn, you look wonderful. I'm really glad you came." I nodded, feeling a small weight lift, just a little. For the first 2 hours, I tried to play the good sister. I mingled, toasted, avoided glancing at the clock too often. Isabel made sure I never felt too comfortable. A cold nod when I chatted with one of her old friends. A comment about my hair being a little flat. A casual shoulder bump when I lingered too long talking to Scott. I noticed something else. Scott and Isabel rarely stood near each other for more than 5 minutes. After every photo op, she drifted toward her college crowd. Scott usually stood off to the side, hands awkward like he was waiting for someone to pull him into the whirlwind. During the intermission, I saw him alone by the bar. I walked over. "Beautiful party," I said. "Yeah, very extravagant." He gave a weak smile. Isabel always knows how to make things look perfect. I hesitated, then asked softly, "You okay?" He turned to me, gaze heavy. "Not sure. But, thanks for asking." A quiet pause. "We haven't had a real conversation since, 2016? I let out a small laugh. "That dinner for Isabel's birthday, when she ordered salmon for everyone even though I'm allergic to seafood?" "Right. I still remember how you handled it. Didn't say a word, just quietly swapped your plate with the waiters and stepped out." I shrugged. "Got used to it." Scott looked at me. "That's what bothers me." Before I could respond, a waiter came by to usher us back into the ballroom for the next segment. Scott nodded, turned away, then murmured like he wasn't expecting an answer, "Evelyn, sometimes I think, maybe I married an illusion." I stood there, a chill tracing my spine. Something in his voice made me uneasy. But there wasn't a clear reason. Not yet. Later, I slipped into the restroom to fix my hair. When I returned, my wine glass had been refilled. Next to it sat a chocolate-covered strawberry on a napkin embroidered with a delicate E. A small note read, "For the sweetest little sister." I froze. My hand hovered over the glass, then stopped. In the reflection of the large window behind me, I saw a figure. Isabel. Standing by my table, eyes locked, and slipping something quietly into her purse. I didn't turn. I tilted my head slightly, still watching through the reflection. And then I saw it clearly. She had dropped something into my glass. And smiled. Slow. Satisfied. I walked away. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every laugh in the room sounded distant. I knew what I had to do. Because I wasn't going to let her win again. Scott stood near the podium, adjusting the cuff of his jacket, looking lost amid the crowd's cheerful chatter. The lights caught his wine glass, casting a pale ring like moonlight behind clouds. I stood at the edge of the hall, half hidden behind a white marble column, watching him with a weight rising in my chest. With string quartet music drifting through the air, it all looked like a perfectly edited dream, until I looked into Scott's eyes. He was searching for someone. Or maybe hiding. Our eyes met. Just for a second. But it was enough to make me step out from where I stood and walk toward him, unsure what I was doing. Only that I had to. "Scott," I said softly as I reached him. He turned, offering a faint smile that quickly faded. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" "I was about to ask you the same thing." I tilted my head. "You don't exactly look like someone celebrating a happy anniversary." Scott glanced toward the outdoor terrace. "I need some air. Would you walk with me for a bit?" I nodded. We stepped out onto the stone hallway, where the soft golden lights were replaced by moonlight scattered across each tile. The music faded behind us. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of cedar from the west lawn, brushing across the shoulder of my coat like a cold whisper. "I'm exhausted," Scott sighed. "So tired I can't even tell what's real anymore." I stayed quiet. "Life with Isabel," he said slowly, "feels like living in a play where I don't get to write the lines. She's always performing. Beautiful, charming, brilliant, and dangerous." I turned to look at him. "You once told me marrying her was the best decision you ever made." "It was. Because I thought I was marrying someone who knew how to love." His voice dipped lower. "But over time I realized Isabel never wanted a husband. She wanted a loyal audience." I leaned back against the stone railing. "Did you two ever try therapy?" 3 times. 3 different specialists. It always started with tears, promises, and ended with Isabel befriending the therapist and pulling them to her side. Scott shrugged. "She always wins. Even in a therapist's office." "Do you feel controlled?" He looked at me, his eyes dark and bottomless. "Evelyn, I can't even control my own emotions anymore. She decides when I sleep, who I see, which jobs I take, even when I'm allowed to feel sad." I gripped the railing, the cold seeping into my skin. "I want to leave." Scott's voice cracked. "Not because of someone else. Not because of you. But because I no longer recognize myself." "Then why stay?" I asked direct. "Fear." He admitted. "Because my career is tied to her family's reputation. Because of assets, because routine. And maybe because I once loved her deeply." The door behind us creaked open. We both turned. Isabel stood there. Her red lips curved in a soft smile, but her eyes were sharp as blades. "Oh, having a little heart-to-heart?" Her voice was airy. "I've been looking everywhere for you, Scott. People are starting to ask where you are." Scott straightened up, his voice calmer than I expected. "I just needed a break." Isabel glanced at me. "Sister-in-law, where were you planning to take him?" "Outdoor therapy session." I stepped back slightly. "Just a normal conversation between 2 people who used to be friends." "Used to be?" "You seem awfully close for used to be." Isabel smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. Scott interjected. "Isabel, Evelyn hasn't done anything wrong. I was the one who asked her to come outside. You always have an excuse for her." Isabel's voice dropped, her tone cracking. "You're just as enchanted by her as everyone else." "Not everyone's putting on a performance like you," Scott replied. "A decent conversation isn't betrayal." Isabel fell silent for a moment, then stepped forward and lightly tugged his sleeve. "Come inside. I don't want our wedding celebration turning into a farce because of your absence." Scott removed her hand, polite but firm. "I'll come in shortly." Isabel turned, walking away with her usual poise. But before the door shut completely, I caught her gaze again. It wasn't anger. Or disappointment. It was a threat. A few minutes later, when I returned to the table, my wine glass had been replaced with a fresh one, and a sweet strawberry rested neatly on a silk napkin. The note was still there, the same familiar handwriting. But what made me freeze wasn't the glass, the fruit, or the message. It was the reflection in the nearby glass panel. Isabel stood a few feet away, half hidden behind a pillar. She was staring at me, her hand gripping a silver clutch tight. I used to be afraid of that look. Now I just felt cold. Because I had just realized, the one person Isabel hadn't completely controlled was me. And I had a feeling she was planning to change that. I sat down, eyes locked on the champagne glass and the carefully placed strawberry. The little handwritten note, "For my sweet little sister, I," tilted softly on the silk napkin, making the whole setup look disturbingly sweet. Reflected in the glass panel to my left, I saw Isabel step back from my table, her lips curling into a satisfied smile as her left hand silently tucked a small amber bottle back into her clutch. I didn't move. A chill crawled up my spine. My mind screamed to walk away, but my body stayed frozen in the chair as if tethered down. No one in that glittering room had any idea what had just happened. Under the gentle golden light, everyone was laughing, toasting to a model marriage, one I had just seen crack down to the core. I leaned down and tilted the champagne glass slightly. A faint residue clung to the rim. Not much. Almost invisible to the naked eye. My hand clenched. The memory hit like a fresh wound. Back in my sophomore year of college, Isabel had a roommate named Mallory, sweet, brilliant, and a top contender for an internship at Wildlife Now. I remember that night. I was working on a paper at the library when Isabel texted that they were throwing a small celebration because Mallory had just received her acceptance letter. A cozy dinner in their campus apartment. No one expected that after that meal Mallory would end up hospitalized with severe poisoning, missing the internship onboarding. Just 2 days later, Isabel showed up in her place, filling in temporarily, at the school's recommendation. I had once confronted Isabel. She chuckled and said, "You think I drugged the food? God, you've watched too many movies." Then she shrugged. And if I did, it's because she was weak. I knew how to take a chance. I had stayed silent. I didn't have enough belief left to challenge her again. Now that chance was sitting in my wine glass. Isabel didn't want me to catch her. She just wanted me to take a sip, lose control, slur a few words, maybe stumble across the ballroom. A little polished chaos, just enough to turn me into gossip fodder for the 100 guests present. I'd seen her pull this stunt on ex-boyfriends, classmates, even my mother, but never with hard proof. I could pour it out, but that wouldn't give me answers. Wouldn't show me what she really did. Wouldn't hold her accountable. I glanced around. Scott was standing near the gift display table holding a wine glass in one hand, adjusting his tie with the other. Isabel was across the room chatting by the photo booth, poised and radiant, the picture of elegance. I picked up the glass and walked toward Scott step by step. "What do you think about a private toast?" I smiled softly, keeping my voice even. "For 12 years of surviving side by side?" Scott looked surprised, then nodded. "Not a bad idea." I raised the champagne flute. "White wine's better than whiskey for this, don't you think? Let's trade just this once." Scott laughed. "Evelyn, you're breaking the sacred code of heavy drinkers everywhere." I smiled. Sometimes breaking the rules is the only way to see the truth. Before he could respond, I placed the glass in his hand and took the whiskey from the other. The whole exchange flowed so naturally no one would have suspected a thing. No one but me, and only me, knew what was in that glass wasn't meant for either of us. He clinked it gently and took a sip. I watched him drink and my hand went cold. Across the room, Isabel had just turned. She saw me standing beside her husband, holding an empty glass, my smile vague. Something flickered in her eyes. A slight furrow of the brow. Her lips pressed tight. He was panicking. Scott didn't notice anything yet. He started talking about a recent business trip to Denver, his tone steady, eyes bright. But I watched every detail. Was his breathing slowing? His balance shifting? His lips drying after each sip? 5 minutes later, back in the main hall, I saw him loosen the top button of his shirt and pull off his tie. For minutes after that, he was sitting with a group of his father's friends, laughing louder than usual, his sentences trailing. A few moments later, he stood mid-speech from a guest and walked toward the dance floor, mumbling along to the background music. I didn't look away. Someone like Scott, always polished, always in control, would never act like that in public. Not at an event like this. And Isabel was staring at me now, her gaze packed with 1,000 quiet knives. I just tilted my head, raised the now empty whiskey glass, and stepped out of her frame. Scott started showing real symptoms after returning to the reception table. He sat in silence for a while, then suddenly stood mid-conversation, mumbling something about flashing lights, giving him a headache. His jacket caught on the tablecloth, knocking over an older guest's drink. I stood near the stage trying to look composed, though I never took my eyes off him. The guests assumed he'd just had one too many. Isabel still feigned charm with her friends, but her neck had stiffened, and her eyes kept sweeping toward me like she wanted to rip my skin off. Scott staggered toward the bar, leaned on it for a moment and then asked for another glass. The bartender hesitated but served him anyway. He lifted the drink, staring at the golden fizz like he was trying to decode something. Then without a word he downed the whole thing in one go. About 5 minutes later he took off his tie, unbuttoned the second button on his shirt, and walked straight to the gift table in the center of the hall, piled high with perfectly ribboned boxes. In a sudden moment, Scott leaned over too far while trying to pick something up from the floor, lost his balance and fell forward. There was a loud, dry thud as the gift table tilted, sending boxes of all sizes toppling to the ground like a reluctant domino chain. A few soft gasps echoed. The staff rushed over immediately, trying to help him up. Scott laughed loudly, clapped one of them on the shoulder, then flung his arm out, nearly knocking over the tray of champagne they were carrying. I stepped closer, trying not to look too concerned. He was talking to a middle-aged guest, but his words were all over the place. Do you see those flamingos swinging from the ceiling? Scott asked, his voice unusually high. The guest gave an awkward chuckle. Maybe you should sit down for a bit. I'm fine. Don't make a big deal. It's my party, right? He spun around on his heel, then nearly collapsed onto the person in front of him. I looked around. Isabel had seen it all. She swept in, lips pressed tight, still forcing a strained smile across her face. Her hand settled on Scott's back, her voice barely above a whisper. Sweetheart, let me take you outside for a bit of air, okay? Scott brushed her hand off. You're always giving orders. You think I don't notice that? Isabel flushed but struggled to maintain her poised exterior. Guests began whispering. A couple seated near me stood up, exchanged a look, then quietly left. The orchestra lowered the volume of their piece. The air in the hall turned thick as if the entire room were holding its breath. Scott staggered to the center of the dance floor, still empty since all eyes were now on him. He spread his arms wide and declared loudly, "Tonight I'm going to dance. For me. For the things I haven't been able to say for 12 years. Isabel hissed, just loud enough for me to hear. Evelyn, what did you do? I didn't answer. I simply turned my head away when I saw her hand clench, knuckles going pale. Scott kept flailing on the dance floor. He bumped into a server holding a tray, knocking several glasses to the floor. The sharp shatter pierced the room. Someone screamed. Then silence. Scott stood frozen for a few seconds, his eyes wide like he was searching for something in a warped space. He blinked. Evelyn, when did you start having a twin? I froze. The whole ballroom went still. Isabel grabbed his arm and tried to pull him toward the nearby sofa, smiling and saying, "He just had a little too much to drink. Everyone, please excuse us." Scott yanked away, his voice almost a scream. "It's not the booze. It's something making my head spin like a storm." A hotel staff member appeared, said something quietly to Isabel. Another one rushed off, likely to get a manager. A guest stepped toward me and whispered, "Should we call an ambulance?" I nodded. Right now. Scott slumped to the floor, back leaning against the table leg. His breathing was heavy. His eyes blurred, then suddenly focused on me. The champagne glass. After that, everything started spinning. Isabel heard him. She snapped, her voice low but strained. "That's enough. You're just drunk." I knelt beside Scott, holding his hand. "Did you drink anything else besides champagne?" "No. Just your glass." I turned to Isabel. She stood frozen. Then her mouth opened as if ready to deny something, but no words came out. I looked her in the eye. "Scott drank the glass you prepared for me." Isabel's face drained of color. She stepped back. "No. I just wanted you to relax. You were tense all evening." But I added a little mild sedative. I laughed, without an ounce of humor. No one gives someone drugs without asking first. The sound of an ambulance siren echoed closer through the grand hall, growing louder. Scott leaned back, eyes shut, lips murmuring something I couldn't make out. I gripped his hand tightly. "I'm here. No one would hurt someone and walk away without consequences." The ambulance pulled up in front of the Arcadia Grand. Its flashing lights reflected off the frosted glass of the revolving doors. Every bit of music, laughter, and clinking glasses had gone silent the moment the hotel staff called for medical help. No one cared about the celebration anymore. because the man of the hour lay motionless near the gift table, his dress shirt soaked in sweat. I stayed right beside Scott as two EMTs lifted him onto the stretcher. One leaned in and asked quickly, "Have you taken any substances or prescription meds in the last few hours?" Scott weakly shook his head. "Just champagne." I stepped in. He drank a glass that may have been drugged. We don't know what substance. I suspect it was a benzodiazepine. One of them immediately changed tone. "You have a reason to believe that?" "Yes. That glass was meant for me. I saw someone pour something into it." "Who was it?" I turned my head and locked eyes on Isabel, who was standing near our parents. Her face was pale, lips tight, her entire body rigid. "My sister. Isabel Hendricks." The EMT glanced at his colleague. "We need to transport him immediately. His symptoms suggest a severe reaction, possibly due to drug and alcohol interaction. Can you ride with us?" "Yes." They wheeled the stretcher through the side hall. I turned my head and met Isabel's eyes. I spoke loudly enough for her to hear clearly, "You went too far." My mother rushed over, grabbing my arm. "Evelyn, what is going on?" Isabel said Scott just had too much to drink. "No, Mom. It wasn't the alcohol." I pulled my arm away. "It was something else. And I think you should ask her why." We reached the nearest hospital in under 10 minutes. As soon as the doctor took over, I recounted everything that had happened. The possible reasons Scott had been drugged, who might have done it, and how it all connected to me. Every detail I witnessed, no more, no less. The doctor quickly ordered a blood test and respiratory monitoring. A hospital security officer arrived right after the nurse finished taking the initial report. He asked for my name, my relationship to the patient, and the reason for suspicion. I repeated everything, including the fact that I had switched glasses with Scott. My words echoed in the room. That drink wasn't meant for him. If I hadn't swapped, I'd be the one lying there. The officer paused his note-taking and looked at me closely. "You believe your sister intentionally drugged your drink?" "I don't just believe it. I saw it, with my own eyes, reflected in the glass door." Isabel showed up at the hospital about an hour later with my mother and a young attorney she'd apparently called the moment I got in the ambulance. She'd changed back into her crisp white coat, but her makeup was smudged, her hair was messy, and her eyes were dark and sunken. Still, she tried to maintain composure when she spoke to the officer. I stood nearby as he asked, "Mrs. Hendricks, did you place any substance in your sister's champagne?" Isabel glanced at me, then turned to him. "It was just one Ativan. A prescription I'm legally allowed to carry. Evelyn's been very stressed lately. I just wanted to help her relax." Scott lay only a few yards away, behind the frosted glass of the emergency room. When the doctor heard the word Ativan, he nodded and confirmed that mixing it with alcohol could cause confusion, disorientation, even respiratory failure. At that point, Scott was out of immediate danger but still required close monitoring. The officer scribbled something in his notebook. "We'll need to keep the medication bottle as evidence. And you may be asked to cooperate with an investigator in the coming days. Administering prescription drugs to someone without their consent can lead to state charges." Isabel let out a laugh, but it sounded cold and metallic. "He didn't die. Evelyn's fine. Everyone's making a big deal out of nothing." Scott opened his eyes just then. He motioned for me to come closer, his voice hoarse. "Did you tell them everything?" "Yes. I told them everything." He nodded slowly, then looked toward Isabel through the glass. "You were really going to do that to Evelyn?" Isabel didn't answer. She turned and walked down the hallway. But I caught a glimpse of her eyes. No anger, no remorse. Just hollow. The officer pulled out his notepad again and asked a few more questions before wrapping up. "The victim survived, but if he chooses to press charges, this could escalate into a criminal investigation." Scott looked at me again, his voice steady and firm. "I'll cooperate. I can't keep covering this up anymore." He said it without flinching. Isabel slumped into a chair outside the emergency room, silent. I stood by the glass, watching quietly as I realized the perfect mask she had spent years building had just shattered beyond repair. The next afternoon, I received a text from my mother. "Dad wants a family meeting at the house. 5 o'clock. Do not be late." No concern. No mention of the hospital or Scott's condition. Just a command. clear and cold, the way she always tried to hold the family together before everything blew up. I arrived on time, stepping across the dark wood floors I knew by heart. Floors that had witnessed years of silent dinners so quiet you could hear forks tapping plates. My mother sat at the head of the table, hands clasped on the glass surface. My father stood by the fireplace, his back straight, shoulders tense. Isabel came in late. She said nothing. Her beige sweater covered her neck, her hair was pulled back neatly, but nothing could hide the dark circles under her eyes. Unlike usual, she didn't flash a fake smile or wear heavy makeup to mask whatever was unraveling inside. My father spoke first, his voice low like a stone dropping into water. "We're not going to dance around this. Isabel, what you did at that party was unacceptable. There is no excuse for it." Silence stretched for nearly a minute. Isabel didn't deny it. Didn't argue. She just stared at the table. "I didn't mean for him to end up in the hospital," she said softly. "It's just, she's always perfect. Always defended. I just wanted Evelyn to lose control for once. Just a little. Enough so she'd stop shining so much." My mother swallowed hard to suppress a gasp. Dad slowly sat down. "That's not how an adult handles hurt or jealousy." "I'm not an adult." Isabel let out a short, choking laugh. "I was never taught how to be one, Dad. We only ever taught each other how to save face." Her eyes welled up, but her voice stayed steady. "Yesterday after I got home, I went to see the psychiatrist who once refused to keep treating me. He still had my file. He recommended a reassessment, and the result didn't change: borderline personality disorder with latent narcissistic traits." The room sank into silence. The ticking wall clock sounded louder than usual, pressing into the void of everything we'd never dared confront. "I have a pattern of manipulating people to feel in control," she continued, each word a sentence passed on herself. "I cling to the version of me others create, terrified of being left, so I destroy every relationship before anyone gets the chance to leave." I looked at her, unblinking. "So you drugged my drink because you were afraid I'd shine more than you in his eyes?" Isabel nodded, unflinching. "Because you're always calm, wise, kind. People respect you without effort. You're everything someone like me can never become." My mother's hands clenched into fists. Her eyes were glassy as she looked toward me. "I always thought a little sibling rivalry was normal. I never imagined it would go this far." Dad braced his elbows on the table. "We should have acted a long time ago. When Mallory ended up in the hospital. When Andrew walked away without an explanation. When Evelyn was left off the scholarship list. We ignored it. Every time." Isabel turned to face me, not avoiding my eyes. "You don't owe me forgiveness. But I have to say this and mean it. I'm sorry. For every time I tore apart something you loved just to feel like I won. For taking things that weren't mine. For making you live in fear under the disguise of family." I stayed silent, chest tight like it had just been hit with a stone. Not because of the apology, but because it came too late. "I used to wish for a sister," I said. "Someone I could lean on when I was scared, disappointed, when the world felt too cold. But all you ever did was bare your claws to protect a throne you thought I was trying to steal." Isabel's face cracked, this time not with tears frozen into place. "I know. And I'm not asking you to come back. I just want you to know, for the first time in my life, I understand what I've lost." Dad nodded, eyes gazing somewhere none of us could follow. "We'll go to family therapy. Individually if needed. But first, Isabel, you need to fully own what you've done. Including before the law." Isabel didn't object. I stood up and left the table. No one stopped me. I didn't say another word. Some wounds are too deep for a bandage of apology to mend. But at least that night the people who once tried to plaster over those wounds finally looked at them. Didn't turn away. Didn't shrug it off. Didn't call it just sister stuff. A week after the family meeting, Scott officially moved out of the mansion on Sycamore Hill. He rented a small apartment near Encanto Park, where old oak trees lined stone paths. I came by to help him sort through a few personal things: paintings, files, some old books Isabel never read. The apartment was simple, unpretentious, but the air was easier to breathe than in the $1 million home they used to share. Scott didn't mention Isabel the whole afternoon. But as I was about to leave, he leaned against the doorframe and said softly, "I start formal therapy next week. A group that specializes in recovering from psychological abuse." I nodded. You deserve better. Not just peace but real freedom. He gave a tired smile. You helped me see that. I didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the kindest gift after a long storm. My family began group therapy after Isabel was summoned for investigation and required to undergo mandatory psychological treatment as part of a reduced charge agreement. Dad hired a neutral therapist 1 session per week. Sometimes we sat through all 90 minutes without a single word beyond the tick of the clock. Other times, Mom broke down, admitting for the first time how exhausted she was from defending the wrong person. Isabel no longer snapped. She sat quietly most of the time, occasionally offering short answers. No defenses. No blame. It was a start. 6 months later, I got a message. Coffee at 3 Lumen Cafe on 8th and Taylor. You don't have to come if you're not ready. I went. Isabel sat in the far corner. No expensive dress, no signature pearls. She wore a slate gray sweater, jeans faded at the knees, and her hair was loosely tied back. She held a nearly empty cappuccino. When she saw me, she didn't smile, just gave a small nod. The caution of someone who had stepped on trust too many times. I sat across from her. No hug. No pretending. You still come here often? She asked, eyes steady. Sometimes. It's quiet here. No one eavesdrops. I glanced around. And it doesn't draw attention. Isabel gave a faint smile. I've spent decades trying to stand out. Now I'm just learning how to stay still. I unlocked my phone, gently rotating the coffee cup in my hands. No rush. You're moving, right? I asked. Filing paperwork to rent a place in Seattle. They've got a better outpatient support group there. My therapist also suggested a new environment, away from the people I've hurt. You're leaving for good? Not running away. Just need space. So I don't repeat it all again. We sat in silence for a bit. The server brought out the pastry I had ordered. The scent of vanilla, cinnamon, and butter softly filled the air. Do you think Scott will ever forgive me? She asked, almost in a whisper. Depends on how you face it. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the harm. It's about not living in resentment forever. I broke off a piece of the pastry. He's chosen to heal. That part's his. Yours is still unfolding. Isabel nodded. Then she looked up, eyes steady on mine. I hope we can stay in touch if you're open to it. Not often. Just when it feels safe for you. I paused a few seconds. I can't trust yet. But I'm open to watching. If you truly change, I'll see it. A slow smile formed on her lips. Nothing forced. Nothing staged. That's enough. On the way home, I didn't feel relief or emotion. Just a stillness. Things were still uncertain, but at least I wasn't letting old pain chain me to the past anymore. Isabel left Phoenix a week later. I heard she enrolled in a DBT-based therapy program, learning how to regulate emotions, identify impulsive behaviors. She sent me a short postcard, just 4 words. Thank you for silence. I didn't write back. Not out of hate, but because I was busy living the life I'd saved by refusing to swallow the sugar-coated poison called family loyalty. Evelyn's story is a sharp reminder that not every blood tie is safe. She faced betrayal, manipulation, and emotional violence from her own sister, someone who hid behind the mask of familial love. But instead of drowning in pain, Evelyn chose truth, chose to defend her boundaries, and chose healing. The path wasn't easy, but it proved that courage doesn't mean unconditional forgiveness. It means knowing when to walk away and start again. What do you think about Evelyn's choices and Isabel's change? Can their relationship ever recover? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.